Dede Allen came to Hollywood in the 1940s from Scripps College in Claremont, California. Now, Miss Allen began her career as a messenger at Paramount Pictures, was it? Or Columbia? It was Columbia Pictures. I wasn't sure, because everybody's got Columbia or Paramount, Columbia, Paramount. And that was in the early 40s. Now, when the Second World War came, women were needed, and Dede became an assistant sound editor. Now, eventually, while working as an assistant to a sound editor who tended to drink a lot, Dede learned to cut, and the rest, as we know, is history. Now, her big break came from Robert Wise, who tapped her in 1958 to edit the movie Odds Against Tomorrow. That was with Harry Belafonte. This after her other big break editing the film Terror from the Year 5000, which I guess we won't talk about tonight, right? Now, how she got the job with Robert Wise is something that we're going to ask her. Now, 2 years later, Robin Rosen chose her to edit The Hustler, starring Paul Newman, and 2 years after that, Elia Kazan gave her the moviola to edit his most personal film, which probably none of you have seen, and I haven't seen, but the critics consider it one of the best films ever made, America, America. And then 4 years later, Bonnie and Clyde in 1967. Then Rachel Rachel in 1968. Then Alice's Restaurant in 1969. Then Little Big Men in 1970. Then Slaughterhouse-Five, 1972, Serpico, 1973, Night Moves, 1975, Dog Day Afternoon, where she got an Oscar nomination in 1975, Missouri Breaks in 76, Slap Shot in 77, The Wiz in 81, Reds in 81, Mike's Murder in 84, Harry's Son and Hem's Son in 1984, The Breakfast Club in 1985. I'm going to read all of these because they're all really good. Offbeat, 1986, The Milagro Beanfield War, 1988, Let It Ride, 1989, Henry and June, 1990, The Addams Family, 1991, The Wonder Boys, where she had another Oscar nomination, and it was the first time on the Avid in the year 2000. Right after that, John Q, 2002, and after that, The Final Cut, 2004. She has done 6 movies with Arthur Penn, 4 with Sidney Lumet, 2 with Paul Newman, 2 with Warren Beatty, and 2 with George Roy Hill. She has worked with the best directors, the best writers, the best cinematographers, the best actors, and technicians in American cinema history. Carol Littleton said about Dede Allen during an interview about the movie The Truth About Charlie, "I learned to allow myself more freedom to just go after the moment. If there is a wonderful moment, don't try to reconstruct it in the editing. Just let it play. Let it go." I know that is the heart of the style of the great editor Dede Allen. She brought the lexicon of the French New Wave into American filmmaking and, of course, scandalized Hollywood. So I just felt like I was walking in Dede's shoes and doing this movie and discovered how much fun it can be to totally liberate yourself. Dede Allen said, "When I start cutting a movie, I always cut with ambivalence. I have a definite intention, a definite starting point, the dramatic function of the scene, the psychology of the characters, etc. But when I become absorbed in the material, I suddenly see all the possibilities the material contains. The unexpected, intended and unintended possibilities. I can't help wandering into the material. I milk the material for all the small possibilities I see in it. A look, a smile after the director has said cut. An unintentional juxtaposition of 2 images. Afterwards, I form a general view again. But it is in the ambivalence, in the collision between the general strategy and the pleasant distractions along the way that constitutes editing as art, the true life of film. And before I bring her up, I want to show one of the great classic scenes of all time. Please welcome to LACPUG, Dede Allen. Okay. Dog Day Afternoon. When was that? That was 1975, and that was directed by the legendary Sidley Lumet, who is still directing movies. Okay, let's start at the beginning. You came to Hollywood in the 1940s from Scripps College, and what on earth brought you to Hollywood in the first place?
Well, I'd always been interested in the theater. My mother had been an actress, on the stage, but she had to stop acting when my father married her because he didn't approve of having a wife acting or doing anything, I guess, in those days. But in any case, I had always wanted. I was a big, huge movie buff. That's all I did was go to movies. And I'd always wanted somehow to get involved with the movies. But the opportunity didn't come until the summer of, was it 1945 or 6? Anyway, it was
1945.
It was 45, it was the end of the war.
Right.
And I got a job as a messenger because all the guys who came back were having so many people in the film business who had gone into the service came back to broken marriages and all kinds of problems. And so they suddenly had an opening for messengers, girl messengers. So Faith Hubley, who was a well-known animator and was in those days my best friend, she's long since died, but Faith and I were the first two girl messengers at Columbia Pictures. And we had a boss named Cap Duncan who ran the desk. He was a captain, constantly ordering us around. And we made friends with everybody, but our favorite floor was the writer's floor. The writers were great. Columbia was not a very big lot. It was over on Gower Gulch. And it wasn't a very big lot, so you got to know everybody on the lot. And it was a good place to learn everything because you could go into every department. We had to anyway. We had to carry the 5 o'clocks, which were the big daily sheets for everything that was going to go on the next day. And there were huge packets of them that had to go to every single department, etc., all over the lot. So Faith and I would take the 5 o'clocks and let the other young women who called themselves girls sit in the dressing room and or go out and look at Cornell Wilde or whatever was the heartthrob of the moment. And we took the 5 o'clocks around and got to know every single department. Everybody thought we were sisters. We didn't really look alike, but somehow or other we must have been a lot alike because people thought we were sisters. And so that's how I started. And eventually,
you got into sound, didn't you?
I got into sound. I couldn't get into picture because the head of the editorial was a bit of a, although he had his girlfriend was an assistant. She was the only girl assistant or female assistant at the time.
You remember what year this was? When you actually got into the sound department? Because weren't you taking a man's job away at that time?
Oh, no, that was earlier. No, that was an earlier thing where I'd been brought up in a depression where young women should not take a job, especially if you came from a fairly well-to-do family. You should not take a job away from a working man who might have children and had to support a family. So it wasn't ordinary for women to go into those positions. There was one sound editor, I think her name was Evelyn Rutledge or something like that. She was very nice in the sound department, but she was the only one who had gotten to the position of sound editing. I couldn't get into picture editing because the man who was the head of the editorial didn't really believe that women should be in editing. Only his girlfriend knows.
The times haven't changed, have they?
Anyway, so I got into sound, and that's the best thing that ever happened to me, because sound.
Yeah, you said that in an interview I read one time, that everything you are today, everything you are as a picture editor was because of editing sound.
Well,
Why
because
is that?
sound is so much part of picture. Silence is part of picture. And there's a rhythm that has to do with sound, and if you're, in those days, we worked on moviolas, you know, sometimes 2 moviolas. When I started editing, I would work on 2 moviolas. I bought my own in order to have an extra one.
Wait a minute, let me picture that. 2 moviolas at the same time, just you, or?
No, we had a synchronizer and rewinds, and you'd throw the cut film in one, and you'd be working in the other, and if you wanted a third view, you just flip the picture out, you know.
Sure, that's easy.
Left one.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of physical work to it in those days.
Just really quick, was it tough for you to learn that tool? Was it tough for you to learn that, the moviola? Was it?
No.
Did you pick it up in 24 hours?
Mechanically, no. I used to have to. My grandfather was a surgeon when I lived. Last 3 years of high school, I lived with my grandparents in Cincinnati, and my grandfather would never touch anything to do with plumbing and all, so I had to do all that.
Well, so you're what we would call a gearhead. You're the person that people go to fix things. You're Mrs. Fix-It.
Well, not exactly, but I had no fear of mechanical things. My grandfather would say, "Oh, Dede, you're so good with your hands, you do it." But he also was an interesting surgeon because nobody knew that he didn't have the use of all of his right hand. He was an orthopedic surgeon. And it was just amazing to watch his hands because you didn't really realize that his right hand had the use of only certain fingers. But my uncle became an orthopedic surgeon. My cousin Charles is still, I guess he's not. No, he's my age. He's a year older than I am, so I doubt he's still practicing. But his son, you know, in other words, it's a long family, medical family business. So anyway, that's how I got in. And eventually, as far as sound is concerned, the rhythm of sound and the rhythm of picture and sound, the rhythm of sound was such, and it was mechanically so easy for me, that I could cut a scene silent and then track it afterwards. And almost inevitably, my assistant was always Jerry Greenberg was my assistant in those days. He's become a very fine editor. And he was my apprentice and my assistant. And he used to track it for me after I would cut it silent. And so very often he might have to change it a frame or two. Very often the ear and the visual were so connected that overlaps worked perfectly.
Would you cut scenes silently all the time as a first pass, or just?
No, when I was in a rush.
Just in a rush.
Or if it was a chase or anything to do with action, it's much easier to cut it first and then track it. At least I found it easier because I could hear it as I went. I mean, in other words, this was something that was ingrained in me, and I've always been extremely grateful for the fact that I started in sound. It's very beneficial in terms of rhythm, everything else. It was...
Are you a musician at all?
Not at all.
Could you have been?
No. I mean,
No, it's interesting. Every time we talk about editing, we talk about rhythm, we talk about tempo, and it's
I used to cut music.
Musicians have that or especially good editors, have that sense
I
of
just never
humor.
took an instrument because I kind of lived all over the world, and, you know, I lived in Switzerland for 7 years on the Magic Mountain. When I was 3, I went over, and when I was 10, I came back. And my father died while I was over there, so my mother just stayed in Paris and kept my sister and me on the Magic Mountain. And I thought it was fantastic. It was only many years later in therapy that I realized that I basically had been orphaned, but I didn't know that.
Life experiences help you with editing?
That's right. You know, you have to take the best of what you got.
All right.
With it.
Yeah, since we don't
I mean,
have-
I had no idea there was anything wrong. I thought it was very glamorous.
Was
In many ways
it the glamour that brought you to Hollywood?
No,
or was
no,
it
no,
just
I
the
was
fact that
talking
you
about,
love, I know,
no, I was talking about Switzerland.
yeah, but I know, but the glamour of just being involved, because you love movies, you
I
love.
love movies, and I had gone to Scripps, and
And what'd you study in scripts? I mean, obviously, they have.
well, the first 2 years you study, first year is all humanities, and the second year you start going in different disciplines. Scripps was a wonderful college, it's still there.
Oh, yeah.
It's in Claremont.
Big
I don't know,
bucks.
it's
Huge
probably-
dollars. Yeah.
Oh,
Very
I'm sure they
expensive.
do. Well, it was $1,200 when I went there, and I was.
It's a lot more.
I was on a complete scholarship. They gave me a total scholarship,
Why?
which was great.
Why?
I don't know, because I had done well, I had.
You're
gone-
hearing okay?
Yeah, a little closer.
Can you hear? Oh, I had,
Complain if you don't hear.
I had gone to a place called the College Preparatory School for Girls in Cincinnati. And my headmistress, Ruthie Jones, was a fantastic teacher and really opened the world to me. She and my mother were from Roosevelt, and of course nobody in Cincinnati, which is a very German town, was supposed to be from Roosevelt. So they would go up in the peanut gallery to hear speeches and things, but you never were allowed to say that Miss Jones, you know, she was the whole reason for my whatever I am politically, which has been pretty far left in my life, I think came from Ruthie Jones. It's that whole thing that we all have when we have one teacher that has a tremendous effect on you.
Yeah.
You know, it's very, very important.
Speaking of that one teacher, let's jump a few years ahead and let's go to Robert Wise, your first big break. And this is 1958 after working how many years as a sound editor? Or as a picture editor, you had to tear it from year 5,000.
Well, I had started in 45 or 46, whenever it was I started, I don't quite remember anymore.
It doesn't matter.
I'm 82 now, so I don't quite remember. But in any case, Bob Wise came east, and Carl Lerner, who was the New York editor at the time, was busy with another picture, so he recommended that Bob Wise talk to me. And
Why? What had you done that he would?
Well,
even
I had
talk-
worked with
Remember, you know, Robert Wise edited Citizen Kane and the Magnificent Ambersons. Why would he recommend Dede Allen, who was probably the greatest living editor at that time?
because Carl, I had worked on, he would take short films, for instance, and documentaries, and he would pass them on to me. So Carl and I had worked together for many years. I'd been he came in over my head into an apprentice job when I was a messenger, because they didn't allow girl messengers to become apprentices. So I had known Carl since I had been the latter part of my, and everything he learned, I learned. I would go in at night, he would teach me things that he learned when he was, you know, working in editorial. And he knew what I could do, and so he recommended me. I can't tell you any further than that. I mean, I wasn't sleeping with him, it wasn't.
That was going to be my next question. You know, that great line of,
No, I was
luck is putting yourself in that position for the opportunity. And you obviously had a lot of determination and you put yourself in that position. And, I mean, that's certainly one of the things
Well, the
that it
opportunity
takes.
came, Bob, when I talked to Mr. Wise in those days. You know, we had a nice talk, and I always asked him years afterwards, I would always say to him, why did you take a chance on me? He said, what was the chance? The worst that could have happened if you didn't work out, I would change you, get someone else. He said, but it did work out. He had never worked with a woman before.
Were there any women working in editing at that time?
Oh, yeah, there had been in the Depression, there had been numbers of.
Well, of course, during the early stages of cinema where people thought of
Well, it
editing
was
as
slightly
sewing.
earlier than mine.
Yeah.
I was in the late 40s, and those were in the.
But
days.
in the 50s, it's a little bit,
This wasn't 50s, this was, I started in,
wasn't it?
when did I start with Robert? Was it 59?
Yeah. Well, wait a minute, maybe, let me just check my notes here. Because tomorrow is the only one I don't have.
59, I believe. I wasn't a kid, I was 34 when I finally got my first break.
59.
59, that's what I thought. And I had started in 45, whatever it was.
So 15, doesn't that make you all feel good? Took her 15 years to get her first big break, so it's.
Well, it's, you know, this is a matter of, well, people, there were no film schools in the first place. There was no such thing as a film school. What they had down at USC was a so-called film editing course, which had if you ever saw one of those cold splicers, they were little black things, and you would put down, and it wasn't Carlos Rivas, it was the old one where you would go like this and put the glue on and then rub it to make it tape.
Jeez.
Well, anyway, you could learn that, and especially if you were proficient, you could learn that in 2 minutes. I mean, it didn't take long to learn that. The mechanics were never a problem for me, so I had a very easy time with the mechanics of anything to do with moviolas and film. In fact, I have often said that I cut much faster on 2 moviolas than I did when it came to, I finally got on the Avid. Well, first place, by the time I got on the Avid, that was Wonder Boys, I had assistants who were, you know, so good that they would do a lot of the work. And,
You know, speaking of a lot of the work, everybody would think, especially working for Robert Wise, and especially being a woman, that a lot of people would have thought, well, Dede Allen didn't do anything. Robert Wise was in the room, he was telling her what to do, and he's, you know,
of course they thought that. And a lot of my friends thought that for a couple of years. They thought, you know, they
Was the first date terrifying?
No, because Robert Wise, yes, of course it was terrifying. But the first Saturday, when I showed him the first thing I'd cut, and in those days you spliced and you had slugs. And if you made a change, you would have 2 slugs. They were black, so that when they went through, they didn't flash. And I had made quite a few changes in the scene I showed him. It was Robert Ryan and Harry Belafonte and Ed Begley Sr. Ed Begley's father, was Ed Begley?
Right.
Yeah. In a scene up in you went up on a long elevator thing, and then there was a scene setting up the bank robbery. And the first thing he said to me, he slapped me on the knee and said, "Good girl, I see you've been working at it." I mean, that was, how could you get more encouragement than that? He was just one of them. He says, "I like that, you've been working at it," and that I wasn't afraid to show him that I had, you know, that I had decisions and indecisions.
Robert Wise being an editor turned director, did he give you a lot of choices, or did he pretty much edit as he filmed?
Oh, no, he gives you quite a few choices, but Robert was very methodical in how he shot a film. But he also gave you lots of performance choices. You know, you would have, can everybody back there hear me? Yeah. Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah.
In any event, with encouragement like that, how can you go wrong, you know? And
So he was a sweetheart.
he was the
during
first
whole-
one, and then I had to go back to my bread and butter jobs at Henry Strauss Films, you know, my industrials and so forth. I wasn't doing spots anymore, spots for commercials. I'd given that up finally, had graduated to industrial films, company films, you know, that kind of thing. And so.
Yeah, and then a couple of years later, it only took you a couple of years later for Robert Rosen to come calling and.
Robert Rawson.
Robert Rosen to come calling and say, would you like to do The Hustler?
No, he didn't quite do it that way.
Ah.
I had met him years before. I'd been collecting money for I was a little political in those days, and the Hollywood strike was a very big strike, and the lab workers had the best union. They were the most, by the best, I mean they were the most leftist union, most non-Bioff Brown. And Bioff and Brown had determined they were going to kill this union. And the Hollywood strike had come at that time. And I had gone to Robert Ross's house to collect money for one of the grips, I remember, whose family was having trouble eating. So I had met Robert on a money collection situation. He had known my brother-in-law, my husband's sister and brother-in-law. They had traded apartments and houses from New York when they were both writers, and each one had taken the other's home for a year. So there was kind of a connection there in that sense. But I didn't know Robert Rawson when I first tried to collect money from him. And I remember the other person who was very influential in my life was Sidney Buckman, who was a writer, and by then he was he was one of the heads of Columbia, and he was a lovely gentleman who always said to me, he was so surprised because I raised money to make a film. Several of us were going to make a little film, and the film didn't come to be. So when I returned the money to him, he was in shock. He said, nobody's ever returned money to me before.
Did your politics have anything to do with working for Robert Wise? Because if I recall, Abraham Polanski wrote Odds Against Tomorrow, but he had to use a front because he was blacklisted.
No, I didn't even know that Abe Polanski, well, I did know him later, but I didn't know him when I took my purse.
You have a purse?
Yeah, I just wanted to get a Kleenex.
Oh.
Thanks, Dora.
No, I was just wondering if there was any connection between your politics with working with Robert Wise. He said, well, I can work with you because I have the same politics as you do.
Well, I don't know that he had the same politics that I did, but he was certainly a very liberal man. And his sister-in-law, sister of his first wife, who was, in my generation, Pat, but sister was Bernadette Doyle, who was head of the Communist Party in California, something like that. So.
Well, speaking of the politics, we want to get all these clips in. So actually, this is a good segue into the first clip that we're going to show from the film Reds. Appropriately titled. Hold on just a second.
He told me to warn you that the print is very washed out.
Yeah, the print, it's an old.
It happens to be Storaro of Editorial.
Yeah. If Storaro was here tonight, he would be horrified.
He would be horrified.
But the print is a little bit washed out. There's just a couple of audio glitches, but you'll get past it. And this is about editing, so get past those couple of audio glitches. So this is from 1981. Warren Beatty directed. Dede Allen was one of the two editors on this, which some people call the apocalypse now of the 1980s because there was so much footage shot.
Yeah. Warren always said, we never shot more than 700,000 feet, and don't you forget, Don Bassett, our native cutter, said we shot more than apocalypse.